Now let's move on first panel discussion of the day, joined by Dr. Frank Ditlev Drake, the Managing Director at E.ON Group Innovation GmbH, Cici Chao, the reporter at Observer, Ben Nyland, the President and CEO at Loop Energy, Grace Kwan, the CEO at Hydrogen in Motion, Alex Ivanenko, the CEO at HighPoint, Sumon Bishwa, the CEO at HYMETH, Katy Perry, the Proposal and Business Development Manager at Siemens New Energy. Together, they will discuss hydrogen's role in the final energy mix on the journey to net zero. So let's start the panel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's panel on hydrogen's role in the final energy mix of a future of net zero emissions. We have 5 great speakers. We actually have 6. I think Grace from Hydrogen in Motion is running late. I hope she joins us in just a few minutes. The host has already introduced our speakers from 3 time zones. For some of them, it's really early morning right now. So I want to start with trying to understand the hydrogen technology itself. I was doing some research for this discussion, and I learned that the concept of hydrogen as a fuel has been around for at least 100 years. And, aerospace like NASA has been using liquid hydrogen to launch rockets into space since the 1950s. But applications of fuel cells, especially in the consumer-facing world like utilities, automobiles, is very recent. So I'm curious what major tech breakthroughs in the past, let's say 10 years or 20 years, made this possible. Maybe each of you can tell us a bit about the important milestones and also challenges in your respective use cases. How about let's start with Katie?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the tech breakthroughs specifically within Siemens Energy is our PEM electrolysis called the Sealyzer 300. Within the last 10 years, we have developed our electrolysis unit, and we're on our 3rd generation. It takes the power demand from 17.5 megawatts and you can scale it to 1 gigawatt. So you can use our electrolysis to produce hydrogen at very large scale amounts. And it's very clean. So PEM electrolysis uses just water and electricity, and then you can use our electrolysis to produce the hydrogen, which then can put out to many different industries, mobility, energy. And one of the challenges is that 40% of our CO2 emissions comes from energy. So we are currently working with our customers that want to reduce CO2 emissions within their own company for their own goals. But we have that remaining 60% that we need to reduce. So for us, we are ready to help those customers in the mobility, petrochemical, and maybe some of the other markets that we may not think about, like the steel industry. Siemens Energy currently has our PEM electrolysis installed in Linz, Austria for a steelmaking process. And so we are excited about what has happened specifically within the last 10 years within Siemens. And then looking forward, we're very excited to see that the Biden administration is making climate change a real priority. And that gives us a lot of hope for more developers and investors that want to get into the hydrogen market and really make a global change.
That's great. Thank you, Katie. About Frank? Frank, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Cici, and hi, everybody from Germany, from Essen, from E.ON. Right, you rightly mentioned that hydrogen has been around for a long, long time. I mean, it doesn't exist naturally. You have to generate it, at least green hydrogen from water. By splitting it by electrolysis, as Katie just said, for example, with the PEM electrolyzer. And so if it's if it should be green, it has to come from green electricity, right? So from PV, wind, or hydropower, and then you can generate it by an electrolyzer. You can convert it, you can transport it, store it, and then at the end of the value chain, you use it by a fuel cell, for example, efficiently, or you burn it, what you might want to avoid because of efficiency reasons. And if I look, coming back to your question, if I look at the entire value chain of hydrogen, I would rather say it's evolutionary, also on the electrolyzer side or fuel cell side, developments going on for many, many decades already. But the real revolution of the last 10, 15 years is really on the green power side, where we've seen a slashing of the production cost of green electricity by over 90%, if you take PV, for example, over the last 10 to 15 years. And this opens up also the opportunity for hydrogen, because with green power for 20 or 30 cents, it just by far too expensive. It's still expensive, hydrogen, with all the conversion steps, but the real revolution, in my view, has been on the PV and wind generation side.
Great. Alex, I know Alex is the founder of HYMETH. HYMETH actually makes hydrogen fuel cells for the aircraft industry, which is a quite interesting use case.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm happy to be here today. Yes, I think not only hydrogen started using in from middle of last century, but hydrogen was the first fuel which delivered humans to the moon. Don't forget about that. And but right now, so what we see that a lot of technologies available on the market in different type of fuel cell, and actually there are two technologies. Hydrogen and the fuel, when you directly burn hydrogen in different engines, and when you extract energy through the electrochemical reaction, which is a type of fuel cells. So I think a lot of significant movement happened in the beginning of this century, when low temperature fuel cells is right now commonly used fuel cell, specifically for transportation, for any types of different types of transport. So because the cost of the product and total cost of ownership of the product dramatically decrease. So that is why right now I don't see any fundamental restriction to use hydrogen as a concept. I mean, hydrogen fuel cells in different types of application, because right now there are, meet altogether two main parameters when customer or big companies make decision to use hydrogen in their platforms, is the total cost of ownership. I would say, let's say, economic aspects. So right now we see very, very cheap fuel cells, and they are really available on the market.
Great. And Shumon is the founder of HYMETH. I know Katie was mentioning that the current fuel cell manufacturers, the hydrogen production producers are trying to tackle some of the fields that generates a lot of CO2, like steel industry. And I know HYMETH actually focuses on a new type of electrolyzer that's low temperature, high pressure. Can you tell us more about that, Shumon?
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, steel and cement industry globally, they're responsible for almost 18% of global CO2 emission. And we in HYMETH, although there are different business verticals we could go for, but we decided to stick to cement and steel industry for now. And we believe that our electrolyzer can be a game changer in this industry. Again, we are totally focusing on lower capex. We believe that as long as the capex is very high, it will be really difficult to implement all these technologies in bigger industry, especially if you want to go from pilot scale to a bigger industrial scale. So we are focusing a lot on how we can reduce the capex for electrolyzer units, and that's the main reason why we had to reinvent the electrolyzer itself and come up with our own technology, so we can bring the cost of electrolyzer down. At the same time, we can also reduce the operational costs, so we can be competitive towards the fossil fuel that normally used in steel and cement manufacturing. Yeah.
Great. Hi, Grace. Grace just joined us. We were just talking about the most important technological milestones that makes hydrogen application possible. Can you tell us a bit about what hydrogen emulsion has been doing? What kind of research are you working on?
Thank you, Sissy. And thank you for inviting us to join this very interesting panel. Hydrogen emulsion, what we've developed is a nanomaterial that stores hydrogen under low pressure. So we have what you might think is a breakthrough technology that makes it cheaper to store and transport hydrogen, which in that middle part of the supply chain between hydrogen generation and hydrogen demand, you have to move the hydrogen, and that's a big cost center. So we have a smaller, safer, cheaper tank, and bring down our low pressure tanks will bring down both the OpEx and the CapEx of storing and transporting hydrogen. I think will make a real difference in making the supply chain, the value chain, affordable for the general public.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. So I work in the media. So in media, there's this debate about hydrogen versus batteries. It often comes up in discussions about electric vehicles because we are at an inflection point of EV adoption. So a lot of people are arguing which is better. I'm curious what your thoughts on this. First of all, what is this debate about? And is it really worth debating at all? Anyone wants to chime in first?
I'd love to jump into that, Sissy. So I get this question all the time. So we're a fuel cell company. We produce fuel cell modules for commercial vehicles. And this comes up all the time. And what I like to say to people is it's about the same question as asking 40 years ago, what's going to win, gasoline or diesel? Because the reality is there are differences between the two technologies and there are benefits. And so with batteries, there are distinct benefits. They're very good at shorter run, lower weight vehicles like cars. So we see the success of Tesla, the Nissan Leaf, et cetera, very well suited to that. But as you move into commercial vehicles, which have to take into account the trade-off between range and cargo capacity, fuel cells really have a distinct advantage from a total cost of ownership perspective. So from our perspective, it's not really about batteries or fuel cells. It's about which technologies fit in the right application. And ultimately, the end user makes that decision. Just like the end user decides whether they want a diesel vehicle or a gasoline vehicle, they'll decide whether the battery vehicle or the fuel cell vehicle best meets their needs.
Great. Anyone else?
Well, I think, Sissy, to Ben's point about the consumer making the ultimate decision, I think the suppliers and OEMs also have to provide that opportunity to make that decision. So it's not fuel cell vehicles, hydrogen vehicles are not readily available to the general public right now. Mm-hmm. And nor is the refueling infrastructure accessible for all people. So it's not as easy as saying which laptop am I going to pick up, because you can plug it into any outlet. Hydrogen technology still has a little bit of adoption and infrastructure that needs to be set up in place so that the general public can make that decision. So if I want to buy a fuel cell backup for my house, I could not do that right now. It's just the technology is just not out in the market so that I can just make a purchase decision. You have to generate hydrogen. I have to get it to me. I have to, plug it in. So, I mean, the technology is still very complicated. It's not, we're not at the Airbnb stage of, I want a room in, California, I'm going to go there. It's not quite at that stage yet, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Grace. She hit the nail on the head. The infrastructure is just one part. The other part is education. I feel I try to educate my customers on how to apply hydrogen, what the technology is on one portion, what needs to be done once you produce the hydrogen, and who's going to take it? Who are these off takers? That's also the big question. And infrastructure plays a large part. We have to expand our pipelines. There needs to be more awareness about the capabilities of hydrogen, specifically in large trucking. You can think of semis along with fuel cells, like Ben mentioned. So it all sort of ties together. But I think educating the public and letting them know that hydrogen's been around for 100 years. There's a lot of capabilities, and we can use that to reduce our CO2 emissions, specifically here in the US. And when I hear the Biden administration make these very ambitious goals for 2030, it's really exciting, because I hope that the infrastructure bill that is out there can also take hydrogen to the next level and really start to make good on our goals that we've made.
Great. Sorry.
I would like to add to the discussion, if that's possible, if that's okay. Yeah. At the end of the day, as Ben said, the customer will decide, but it's correct what Grace said. I mean, hydrogen, it's a chicken or egg. There are hardly any fuel cell cars, except for some demo cars, etc. Right now. With the revolution in battery design, it's really become, now it's exponentially growing. So at the moment, I would say in the passenger car area, the race appears to be won by battery cars, even for longer distances, since ultra-fast charging is becoming the norm with even up to 300, 400 kilowatts. And we just recently completed a study with the University of Aachen Technical University on commercial vehicles, also on long-range heavy transport, where everybody would say batteries are just too heavy. Yes, and they are heavy. 8 tons, for example, a battery for 500 kilometers. But usually, even for heavy trucks, the weight is not the problem, but the storage space. And batteries don't take up that much storage space. So at the end of the day, it might be economics which will win. And here, direct use of electricity looks better, even in that segment, what nobody would have assumed. But there could be a twist, and that's my last sentence here, in the longer term. For electricity or hydrogen to really make sense from an ecological standpoint, it needs to be green. It needs to be produced from green excess electricity, which we don't have right now in Europe. Yeah, it's a lot of green electricity, but still, if you switch on an electrolyzer in Europe, the power for that electrolyzer will come from a gas or coal-fired power plant or nuclear. And the question is, will we have sufficient green electricity, more than 100% in the future? If that is the case, then there are good chances for batteries in the longer term. But otherwise, if Europe cannot do that, not provide more than 100% electricity from green sources, then we need to import green hydrogen from other areas. And then, to be really green, then the fuel for future cars might also come from hydrogen in the longer term. That's an interesting twist.
Mm-hmm. Ben mentioned total cost of ownership. This reminds me of, this may be a dumb question. So one argument I hear a lot from this debate is that hydrogen is very expensive to produce and store. With my limited high school chemistry knowledge, I know it's also very dangerous. It's explosive. I want to know, how safe and cheap can we make hydrogen with existing technology? Is it like...
Yeah. I would say because we are designing the system specifically for air transportation needs, and of course, hydrogen seems right now is very, very expensive. But I have already seen a lot of roadmaps how hydrogen will become much cheaper. Hydrogen fuel, energy source starting from right now $18 per kilogram right now in California, because I'm using Toyota Mirai, to $2-3 in a couple of years. So it will happen. But anyway, with customers, we have already calculated total cost of ownership specifically for air transportation market like eVTOL, and we estimated estimated that parameter. So with standard combustion engine helicopter. So what we found out that hydrogen version of that aircraft will be, I mean, in terms of total cost of ownership, will be 2 times cheaper. So it means that kilometer flight hour will be 2 times cheaper in comparison with standard combustion engine, and 25% cheaper in comparison with standard lithium batteries. So not standard, it's ideal lithium batteries. I would say with high discharge rate, with high energy capacity, and etc., which right now is not exist specifically for air transportation needs. So I think it's a very, very good. That is why, for instance, in my portfolio, we have a lot of customers in our pipeline. It's top tier guys who have already understood that hydrogen, it actually doesn't matter how much does it cost, because not only hydrogen directly influence on total cost of ownership, right? So it's a maintenance cost, it's a service cost, and cost of hydrogen fuel cell. So that is why we do strongly believe, and right now we have a lot of economic aspect behind that, and we are absolutely confident that hydrogen technology is much cheaper in comparison with standard technologies which right now is available on the market. And of course, hydrogen is much more green technology, right?
Yeah, it's good to bring up these factors for consideration, because I feel like the first batch of electric vehicles have been on the road for less than 10 years. A lot of people don't yet fully understand the concept of total cost of ownership or embraced the idea of when
that is why, if I'm going to say, circle back to previous question, hydrogen is mostly about not for private use. And I absolutely agree with that concept. It's mostly for B2B, business to business applications. Yes. When you have to think about what is your strategy in the next 5 years and etc. So you calculate that and understand how you will develop your business model. So that is the main idea where, and you will definitely choose hydrogen because actually there is no options on the market right now.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Shuman. I know your company makes a lot of applications for industrial partners. How is cost of ownership applied there?
Well, I think it is very, very important, especially I'll just say even like a few weeks before, I was trying to make a business case for a cement manufacturer, and it was extremely difficult to come up with a business case when the cost of electricity is too high. So I would say the main driving force here would be if you can somehow reduce the cost that related to the production of the units, for example, electrolyzers or electrolysis system. And also we need to find a way, how can you reduce the cost of electricity itself? And obviously the efficiency also matters a lot, because if the systems are more efficient, then we need less energy to produce a certain amount of hydrogen. I think all these things will play a very important role when it comes to reducing the cost of hydrogen, let's say per kilogram. Some companies nowadays claiming that they can bring the cost €1 per kilogram of hydrogen, which is, I would say, very ambitious. But at some point, we have to come up with some solution that can actually bring the cost of hydrogen to this level, so we can compete with the fossil fuel.
Great. I have a question about kind of the global goal towards net zero emissions. So the US, Europe Union, and Canada, which covers 100% of today's panel, they have all pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Besides all the innovations and industry transitions going on at the moment, what else do you think needs to happen in order for these countries to achieve that goal? And more importantly, I think, what about the less developed part of the world? Is it this week, Bill Gates just made a big comment about COVID vaccine patents. He said it's not a surprise that rich countries have prioritized vaccination and causing a shortage of vaccines in poor countries. How does this apply to the renewable energy world? Whoever wants to jump in first.
I can start. possibly. I see renewable energy as a big chance for the developing world. I mean, we already mentioned, someone mentioned the need for electricity costs to come down, but already today in most countries, production of green electricity is cheaper than fossil electricity. For example, if you take sub-Saharan Africa or so, where if you have electricity at all, then it's produced from decentral diesel engines, not good for the environment, very expensive. And if you have a solar panel, that is much cheaper already. So what needs to happen to achieve net zero in 2050? I think most experts today agree to 3 or 4 elements. One is efficiency, of course, in all sectors. The second one is green electricity. That is the basis. If there is no green electricity, 100%, then we will not have net zero. Then comes direct electrification, and then hydrogen for the hard to abate sectors. These are the 4 steps that you need to take. And from my viewpoint, technologically and commercially or economically, everything, almost everything is there already. It's mainly now politics, it's planning, it is regulation that needs to happen to overcome some hurdles. Technology is there, and that is really good news.
See, I'd like to jump in on Detlef made a great point about regulations. The number one driver for clean tech is regulations. So if you have a zero emission mandate like California has had for many years, they drove OEMs to develop zero emission vehicles for that market because a certain percentage of vehicles had to have zero emission. So both battery and hydrogen vehicles were developed specifically because of that regulation. And that's going to be the same around the world. Regulations are the number one driver for behavior, whether it be food or the type of energy we use to power our homes and power our vehicles and get around. And it's that why don't we have hydrogen-powered laptops or hydrogen-powered, why don't we fly around in hydrogen-powered planes? The regulations need to be updated and progressive in order to really make a dent on our CO2. And we did it with the ozone and Freon. The whole world acted very quickly, and the whole shrunk. So we can see we can act collectively and make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned kind of backstage that you do a lot of work in China. China has very aggressive policies to encourage EV adoptions, and I'm sure in industrial areas as well. What can you share with us some of your observations working there?
Yeah, absolutely. So just from a macro perspective, China has repeatedly driven technologies onto the main stage. So probably the first area they did that was solar back in the 2000s. It was the first time we saw the power of the Chinese economic engine to really transition a technology. And since then, they've done that and done work in semiconductors and wind energy, battery electric vehicles. They did a massive deployment of battery electric buses in cities like Shenzhen. They turned over fleets of 18,000 buses in a matter of a couple of years from diesel to battery. The irony being all those battery buses were being charged by coal plants just outside the city. But they have this huge economic engine to drive forward. And so their focus is now on hydrogen and fuel cells. So yes, we work a lot in China. We have a Chinese subsidiary. We just announced this morning the shipment of 10 fuel cell modules to Nanjing for the second phase of a 300 vehicle project in that city with municipal buses. And so they are moving in a significant way. And pre-pandemic, I would have said they were the primary driver for hydrogen and fuel cells globally in terms of serious economic commitment. As the pandemic has progressed, Europe has really stepped in as well and is making a very strong play to be a strong second or maybe even first in that process. So I'm hoping with the Biden administration, we start seeing that kind of movement in North America as well. If we can get all three jurisdictions pushing hard for zero emissions, we'll see some progress there. But yeah, China is a very exciting market for fuel cells right now.
Great. We only have about 3 minutes left, so why don't we go around the room for the last time, just in maybe a few sentences, and to answer kind of the theme question of this panel. What do you think is the role of hydrogen in the final energy mix of a zero emissions future? How about let's go from right to left. Grace?
Well, thank you, Ceci. Hydrogen is going to be the driver of zero emission. Yes, the technology is nascent. Yes, the technology is a little bit expensive. Technology like ours will, going back to your total cost ownership question, it will seriously drive down the cost with low pressure. We could bring the cost of the pumps from $2 million to $1 million, like drive it in half. So that's going to make a real difference to the checkbook, which we all vote with. But that's just a matter of time and energy. Hydrogen is going to probably be 30% of our energy footprint.
Thank you. Shuman?
Well, I think as the cost of hydrogen coming down, more industries should start using green hydrogen instead of fossil fuel. And there are some industries which are very conservative. They don't want to switch from one technology to another. But for them, I think carbon capture technologies are also improved a lot over the years. So if you can come up with some solution like combining CO2 with hydrogen that can be used for internal combustion engines or like existing technologies, that could be also a solution towards a green net zero emission future. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Ben?
Thanks, Ceci. I see hydrogen ultimately being a dominant source of energy in the future. Over the near term, I see it being adopted in pockets where the economics make sense. I think as much as I agree with Grace that regulations are going to drive things, there are also business economics that just bring home a real reality to the situation. And so businesses will make decisions based on total cost of ownership. Our view of that through conversations with fleet operators and OEMs is that hydrogen makes sense in a lot of cases. And so that's where we're focused, is where the economics make sense. And through that momentum over time, hydrogen will become a dominant source.
Well, we have 10 seconds left. I'm afraid they're going to cut us off. I think this concludes today's discussion. If you have any other questions, you can find our speakers on their company website or social media. I want to thank everyone for participating today and offering their invaluable insights. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great moderation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.